MiVote Mackinac tonight is brought to you by ITC Holdings Corp., the Masco Corporation Foundation, DTE Energy Foundation, PVS Chemicals, World Asset Management, a Comerica company, Raymond, and by the Shirley and Bill Fox Fund.
Good evening, I'm Christy McDonald, and thanks so much for joining us for our coverage of the Mackinac Policy Conference. Some big headlines out of the conference tonight. We're going to take a closer look at the need to improve K-12 education and the focus on STEM education in Michigan. Plus, the 3 county executives square off on the deal for a regional water department. Also tonight, the call for protecting gay employees in Michigan from discrimination, and the governor picks up an endorsement. We'll get to it all, but first, education in Michigan and a change in focus inside the classroom. First, some sobering statistics. Since 1980, the wages of a college graduate has gone up almost 60%. The wages of a high school graduate has gone down 11%. And the wages of a high school dropout are down 22%. STEM education, the talk of the education world from D.C. to Detroit. It's an acronym for the teaching of science, technology, engineering, and math. The skills many experts say are vital to get jobs in this 21st century global marketplace.
How do we really equip students across the world in the knowledge of technology across the board that then could be applied in a variety of different jobs?
That is the key, but it takes changing the way we think about education.
So everything that I talk about in technology, I don't see it through gadgets and gizmos or anything else. I see it through the eyes of teaching and learning. If we make our teachers better, stronger, more efficient, more effective, that'll be great. And if we make our kids more engaged, more interested, spend more time reading and writing, that'll be great.
And experts say reading and writing are equally as important as well.
We ought to change STEM to STEAM. And right in the middle of the ST should be A for the arts.
With one thought in mind.
Even if we do a better job in science and math, we still got to make sure our kids can read and can write and can converse. Those are the skills that the 21st century demands.
And while those STEM jobs are forecasted to continue growing, it's not only engineers or those with 4-year technical degrees.
Mostly we're talking about students who need some post-secondary training of some level, either an associate degree or dedicated programs in related areas that leads to certification or apprenticeship.
So we start tonight with education in Michigan with our roundtable up here on Mackinac Island. They are also our contributors on My Week. Nolan Finley from the Detroit News and Stephen Henderson from the Detroit Free Press. Gentlemen, all right, let's kick it off. Education has always been something we've talked about here on Mackinac Island, but this is a little bit of a different turn that we're looking at, concentrating on STEM. And you moderated the session with Joel Klein, Nolan.
Right, and I think the difference is there's a growing understanding that you have to connect education and the economy. We have to start training our children and our workers in Michigan for the jobs this economy is producing. And this job right now is this economy right now is producing a lot of high-tech automotive jobs and engineering and design and what have you. And our schools aren't putting out enough of those workers. And we had a poll this week asking Michigan parents and students how they felt about careers in the auto industry. And it was really appallingly low, their confidence in this industry to produce good jobs.
But so we talk about it and say, this is what we have to start concentrating on. But now when we start to put the curriculum into place or get those actual ideas in the classroom, Stephen, what are we faced with?
Well, I mean, we've still got a massive resistance within the educational establishment to reform of any kind. Whether
Why is reform such a dirty word?
Well, I mean, part of it, to be fair, is that we've implemented reform in the past in a way that has alienated teachers, who we need to be partners in education, and we don't need to make them the enemies. They are not the cause of the problems, and we need to make that clear. But also because change is hard. Change is just difficult, and change seems to be more difficult in this state, I think, than other places.
It always gets caught up in our politics, and our politics here are fractious, as they are in other states. But even New York City was able. I mean, that's one of the most fractious places.
It's very
in the
difficult
world.
to
Put together some pretty good reforms under Joel Klein and got it done a lot more quickly than we're doing it in Michigan.
Okay, so when you sit down and say, all right, so let's start with some of these reforms, make them palatable and understandable and actually achievable in our state. So where do those conversations then start? And how can we afford to keep sitting back and saying year after year, we've got to get those reforms in place?
The one thing that stuck with me from the Joel Klein presentation, he said, we have to make teaching a revered profession that attracts our best and brightest. Not everybody should be able to walk into education school and say, I want to be a teacher. It should be very exclusive. Now, you want to pay for the best, but it's better to pay for really great teachers than spend a whole lot of money trying to make up for their deficiencies. Raise the pay, get the best and the brightest in that business, and keep the mediocre and low-performing teachers out.
And we're talking now about doing that, right? I mean, some of the discussions in the legislature about teacher evaluation systems, looking at student growth as part of the portfolio of evaluating teachers, that's moving in that direction. Now, we got to move a lot further and a lot faster.
It moves in that direction, Steve, but what it misses here is the focus is on, it's almost punitive to teachers.
Well,
you know?
right, yeah.
We're going to try to root out the worst. What he's talking about is up front.
Celebrating the best.
Make sure only the best get in.
Sure.
So you don't have to worry about this 5-10 years down.
Well,
and we are not working on that. You're
People
right.
might be discouraged, though, looking at the amount of funding that's spent on schools in the state right now, and maybe some of the decisions that are being made. You know, specifically, we've been talking about up here, looking at transferring the oversight of the standardized testing to the Treasury Department instead of education. And so, and again, I mean, we're still having.
When you start talking like
you're
that.
still having these conversations.
But the governance of education in Michigan is part of the problem. We're one of only 3 states where the governor doesn't have control of the education agenda of the education department. Almost every other state, the governor either appoints a school superintendent or a school board. In this state, they're elected separately and they pull in 2 different directions, which is part of the reason we can't come together on reform ideas.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, this idea of an independent school superintendent worked once upon a time in Michigan. It doesn't work now, and it prevents the governor from being able to just say, this is the direction we're going, and get everybody on board. If you look at other states that are way ahead of us, Maryland's a great example of a state where there is a partnership between the state superintendent and the governor that has enabled reform to actually happen.
How would you say that we rank education in importance here in the state of Michigan? It feels like we've had a lot of other issues to deal with economically in terms of balancing our books at the state level. Where are we in terms of valuing education in Michigan?
I think our parents are starting to value it. We, again, in our poll this week, we asked people, where would you put extra funds? Education come out on top, even of roads. So I'm not sure that it's a low priority at all in this state. We just simply can't do the things we need to do to make it about making kids smarter.
We're one of a handful of states that spends more on prisons
and welfare
and welfare and other sort of support things than we do on schools. I think that says everything about where our priorities are.
Yeah, I know, but you're going to still get that fight of people saying, well, you can spend more, but what are you spending it specifically
Well, that's a great
on?
question.
That is a good point.
That's a great question. You got to have quality control in terms of, again, the number of school districts we have, this thirst we have for independence at every level is the enemy of organization and quality control. We've got to start dealing with some of that. You can't just let everybody do what they want to do and then have high-ranking schools.
We've got to start settling on we pick a model.
Yeah.
Every year we got a different model, a different priority that we're sending through the schools, disrupting what they previously doing. We've got to pick something and stick to it.
Is there any systems that we look at to say, Michigan, we should be emulating exactly what they're doing
Lots of
in
Florida
Florida,
is doing
Tennessee,
well.
New York, Massachusetts, Maryland. There are
Almost
lots of states, and what's interesting is that it used to be states.
Everybody but us.
Well, it used to be states in the Northeast, right? They have a lot more money than we do. They've always been able to do things a little easier. But now you're starting to see states in the South that were way behind us leapfrogging us. Florida is a good example. Tennessee is another example.
A great example, and they're doing it because they see education as an economic issue.
And that's what I was going to say. Again, when we have these conversations about education, to finally connect it to the business community here and what they're going to need need to fulfill those jobs is a huge component
the other
of
piece
that
of this
conversation.
is the investment in higher ed, right? We're still lagging behind there and not catching up to all the disinvestment we had over the last decade.
All right, moving on now. A lot of talk on the deal to create a regional water authority. The counties haven't bought in, and it is being hotly debated by the 3 county executives: Brooks Patterson from Oakland, Bob Ficano from Wayne, and Mark Hackle from Macomb County. There's a huge subject matter of water department. And I think spinning off the Detroit Water Department, big decisions that you've had to make in dealing with the Detroit bankruptcy process. And there's a lot of sticking points. And I'm going to start with you, Brooks, because you have been talking about it most off. And I want you to, I guess, first off, make your case of why Oakland County does not want to dive into this agreement.
Well, first of all, we don't have all the details. We don't have all the research. We've been asking for over 9 months, give us more financials so we can just figure out what we're getting into. I can only talk about one half. One half of this whole water debate is now under a gag order by the court. The top half is wide open for comment, and that deals with the attempt to have the suburbs accelerate their payments for their water bills and make the pension payments for the Detroit Water and Sewer Board pensioners. And so right now the bill would be normally around 18 million. And next year it's going to go from 18 million to 65 million. Now, right, you know I am choking on that number, and I think why the rest of these guys might be choking. I can't speak for them. And then the year after that it goes to 45 for 9 years. And if you add up the first year plus the last 9 years, it comes up to $450 million, which is what they're short in funding the grand bargain. So somebody came up with this great idea of, hey, we can raise the $450 we need to make all the numbers work. Let's just shove it onto the suburbs.
But wouldn't it be a good deal, and Bob, let me ask you, that finally Wayne County, Macomb, and Oakland can buy into this system and have partial ownership of, and control of this system as well?
There is, and you know, this because of the bankruptcy, you're up against some deadlines that normally you probably wouldn't be up against. I think Judge Rhodes is going to make decisions in this, and they call it technically a cram down that could eventually say this is the way the system's going to run. I think that the legislature, and I know the governor, have looked at this, and I think, to me personally, the authority is the way that's probably going to be the best, because if you have a private entity that's going to run this, you're going to have someone that's going to accelerate those costs one way or another. Their first obligation as the shareholders is what it should be, but they're going to accelerate it, and since they have a monopoly, any of those costs are going to be immediately be able to pass it on to the ratepayers. Brooks is right, and I know Mark agrees, is that everybody wants more information about what is actually the costs of some of these situations. And I don't know, there's mediation that's going on, and Wayne County filed the mediation order, so we're wanting this process to work. I don't think that Judge Rhodes, with such a large asset, is just going to leave it out there and say, after the bankruptcy, we'll deal with this later on. Plus, there probably is room for negotiations now because they've been able to put together more funding sources in terms of, from what I understand, of the grand bargain, and you may not have to need the exact amount that Mr. Orr is asking for in the bankruptcy.
I think that a lot of concern about this, Mark, also is timing, and the fact that there is not a lot of time to make this deal, and when you are entering into this kind of deal, that you want to make sure you do your due diligence and get all the information possible, and that something like this could take years to negotiate with the expansive, I mean, the largesse of the system.
You're absolutely right. Again, we want to be regional, but we want to be responsible. And let's face it, this isn't about the regionalizing of the water system. If that really were the issue, we would have worked on this long ago, and we would be taking our time to do our due diligence and do it right. This is a rush because of bankruptcy. There's no question about it. Our concern, and as we've been talking with Oakland County about this, is for the ratepayer. So we want somebody that's going to come in and really take a look at this. The numbers that are flying all over the place and the conversations that have been out there, boy, I tell you what, they're all over the board. But I have not had anybody really look at this and put at the forefront the ratepayers and how the rate structure is going to look, as well as the infrastructure issues. I don't disagree that this would be a good thing for the region to have it regionalized, but how it's being pushed our way and how it's going to be crammed down our throats has been a real problem for me, because really we haven't been able to be responsible as elected officials to look at these numbers, to give a good assessment, to tell our ratepayers, here, this is a good thing and here's the reasons why.
All right, the suburbs have not been crazy about this water debate right now, and Brooks Patterson has heated up the conversation a little bit in talking about perhaps tweaking the grand bargain to some certain extent, Nolan.
And Brooks has sort of been a target today. There's been a lot, the rhetoric has gotten increasingly hostile and testy today. It's sort of a internecine Republican war up here between the governor and his people and advocates of the Regional Water Authority, and Brooks, who is still sticking to his contention that this deal would put the burden of Detroit's bailout on suburban water customers. And a lot of the focus up here today has been trying to break through that resistance and bring those two together.
Is it, I don't know, I guess, is it fair to say, Stephen, that, you know what, a deal like this should take a lot of time, that maybe that they're a little skittish that it's trying to go so quickly and they're afraid of signing on to something that they're not going to be able to get out of?
That's a perfectly reasonable argument. You think of how long it took us to get the COBO
4 years.
Authority gone. We've done this in 4 months, because of the emergency of the bankruptcy. You still need that dose of reality to settle in everywhere. There is still this fantasy, I think, in the suburbs that we can continue to pay such low water rates and magically have a better system than we have. The system is underfunded. There's a massive disinvestment over a long period of time. Everybody is going to have to pay more for water. Now, who should pay the most of that more? I think that's a reasonable conversation to have. Who should pick up the liabilities for things like pensions, the waste, mismanagement that's gone on in DWSD? Those are all good conversations to have. But this idea that at the end of it, somehow people will be able to keep these low water rates and expect the service that we get, it's ridiculous.
It's not going to happen. I think everybody understands that. Where Brooks and Hackle sort of bristle is the idea of having also to pay, not just for the infrastructure reforms, but monetizing the district or the system for the benefit of Detroit, providing extra money for Detroit's operating fund, for its general fund. They really are holding firm against that. And, it may be that this thing starts in the bankruptcy court, but finishes outside of bankruptcy. That's what Mike Duggan's advocating for. I don't think you get it done before the bankruptcy ends.
But can you do that knowing that they were kind of looking at some of that revenue coming in to get into the general fund?
They need that revenue, and this is for better or for worse, suburban people got to get their mind around the idea that this is a sale of an asset. It is worth something. Detroit is entitled to remuneration for giving up this asset, and so we revenue that comes out of monetizing it should go to the city. It's like anything else. I mean, the suburban communities are customers of this system. They are not owners. The owners of the system live in the city of Detroit, so they should benefit from any change in ownership.
But there is a real sense that they're being dinged for the mismanagement and corruption of that district that system that is undeniable. The state may have to get involved here in some way to sweeten this deal to bring them across. And we asked the governor about that yesterday. He didn't seem at all willing to do that.
He's a little more money to put in this deal.
But they could do things like back the refinance of the bond.
They could do that.
Doesn't cost him anything.
I get the sense, though, that he wants to get through the grand bargain right now, that they need to tie that up.
Well, this is part and parcel of it. I mean, Brooks is lobbying his lawmakers, and Hackle's lobbying his lawmakers out of Macomb County to include in that grand bargain legislation protections against the suburbs having to pay what they feel is an under.
But it's a protection against rate increases, and it's like, well, you're going to have rate increases one way or another. You can argue about what it goes for, but you're going to have to pay.
But there's that whole complex pension amortization issue,
right,
and that's really a major sticking point.
And that can be a concern. All right, moving on. Today, announcement by the chamber, and also the governor talked about that, about possibly changing the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act to include sexual orientation and gender identification, which I think is a big step in making Michigan, or putting that signal out that while gay marriage is working its way through the courts, that there is an openness to the state, and so people who want to come in, work here, there's a different image of the state.
And that's funny, because a year ago when I was up here, I had a conversation with the governor's guys and asked about the coming priorities in advance of the election. And the Elliott Larson amending that law was on their list. The governor wanted to send some signal that his administration was friendly toward gay rights. And this is a way to do it, short of saying, gosh, we're going to go for gay marriage, we're going to go for this, that, and the other thing. This is a workplace fairness bill that the governor and the business community feel is necessary.
And it seems like it could get done.
I hope it does. I mean, this is an embarrassment for Michigan. The way that our Constitution and laws are set up to permit discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. We are way out of step with other states that, not just on the marriage issue, but on basic equality issues, other states have done more than we have. And so I think there is a window of opportunity. I think there is actually a much bigger window of opportunity here. I think if you put a repeal of that gay marriage amendment on the ballot in Michigan, you'd have a good shot at getting rid of it. But that takes some organization and money and political will that we don't have quite yet.
All right, well, let's move on. The governor picked up an endorsement. We are in an election year, of course, and it was not a surprise that business leaders from Michigan endorsed him. But I think it also goes to signal that up here at this conference, this is the governor's stomping grounds.
To the point that Mark Schauer won't even come up to the Grand Hotel. He's holed up at the Chippewa Hotel down there,
is,
trying to hold fundraisers.
Mackinac in exile.
Yeah, I mean, he's trying to hold fundraisers.
Well, and he announced his
to.
candidacy here last year.
I know, and so it's just, I mean, why come up here if you're going to make some sort of odd statement that you don't want to come up here and associate with business people? It shows the disorganization and disarray in his campaign, and it explains why this week we came out with a poll shows the governor with a solid 10-point lead, and more than half the people in this state don't know who Mark Schauer is.
Okay, he's got a solid 10-point lead, but there's still that he's not quite above 50%.
He's not above 50%, and that's a concern for the governor.
Well, if you had, and this is going to sound dismissive, or maybe more dismissive than it should, if you had a strong Democratic candidate, this governor would be in trouble because there are lots of things that he's done that people don't like. He also has a very strong record to be able to run on, but it's a mixed bag, and that shows in those soft support numbers. Mark Schauer, I don't think is that Democratic candidate, or at least he's not shown himself to be.
He was the only candidate they could get.
Well, because...
and so when you talk about a strong Democratic candidate, Steve, what name pops into your head?
Okay, well, wait a minute. What do you mean that he was the only candidate they could get? Well, explain that, Nolan.
They were not exactly knocking the doors down to be the challenger to Rick Snyder.
No, that's right. You're right. I mean, the bench there is still very thin, particularly for statewide offices. Now, 4 years from now, 6 years from now, that will look very different.
We're running this year.
Well, understood, and that's what this is what happened to Republicans in 2006. They ran Dick DeVos against Jennifer Granholm. She stomped him. It goes like this sometimes, and you don't always have the right guy or woman at the right time. That's where the Democrats probably are.
Has he struck the right tone, the governor has, in this conference?
Well, what he did today is stand up here and say, I've accomplished this, 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 and this. And that's key to his campaign because a number of people still think the state's on the wrong track. And he's got to convince them that things are getting better.
Okay. All right. Well, I want to go to something that happened late this afternoon at the conference, and it was really a congratulations, a thank you for service, and a standing ovation for Senator Carl Levin, who is up here at the conference and is retiring. And Congressman John Dingell was there as well, and the governor was there, and we have a little bit of a video of that. I think we do. What that happened. No, we don't have that. Okay, but I think it was an interesting, and I think a lot about it is the changing of the guard and our congressional delegation that we are losing, and that we have maybe perhaps some new energy coming in, but really it is a mark of the changing of the guard, I guess.
Well, we're losing a lot of seniority, that's for sure. But that happens when people stay
forever,
a long time.
Not forever. I mean, if you can still do the job and you still have the mind for the job, you wouldn't want to take that away from anyone. But my thing is, have you puffed up the bench enough?
Well, on the Democratic side, the answer is almost universally no. I mean, I think that's one of the real weaknesses in the party, is grooming, sort of young up-and-comers to be ready when these opportunities come up, which is why we had such a hard time finding, more than one candidate for the governor's race, more than one candidate for that Senate seat that Carl Levin is vacating. This is a delegation that, on average, is much older than what you find in other states.
But it'll be younger
20
coming
seconds
out.
we have
It's really young now.
So you're trading clout for youth and energy. It's going to hurt us in the short run to run for influence, but I think long term you're going to have much more energetic, engaged congressional delegation.
Nolan Finley from the Detroit News, Stephen Henderson from the Detroit Free Press. Gentlemen, as always, thanks so much. And finally tonight, a trip with our friends from Under the Radar. It is no surprise they found a way to make the trip aboard the Mackinac Island Ferry just a little more memorable for us all.
The tide of Michigan's economy is rising, and there's an old saying, a rising tide floats all boats. And speaking of boats, these are the important boats that take the movers and shakers to the policy conference. wonder if I'm a mover or a shaker. Since 1945, Shepler's Mackinac Island Ferry has been getting people safely to and from the island. It's a tough job, but according to Chris Shepler, totally worth the effort.
How long has your family been running these ferries?
We started back in 1942 with a 6-passenger speedboat that my grandfather actually built. And we have morphed into what we are today, which is 5 high-speed planing hulls, and we also run a freight service out of St. Ignace.
It seems like you got more than 5 boats because they're always going by back and forth, but you guys run them so quick.
Yeah, we have some pretty tight margins that we make sure that we take care of the guests. That's our #1 priority, is to make sure that those guests are taken care of on the city side as well as the Mackinac Island side.
Well, I was going to ask you, what's it like taking all these important dignitaries to and from the conference?
The last 2 days have been some very important dignitaries, and it's not our first time, so we're used to it and we love it, and yeah, it is kind of exciting to see these faces arrive on our dock.
What's the most rewarding thing for you doing this?
I think the smiles on people's faces, you know, if we can provide the service that we promise, and we do, is to see the enjoyment, especially the kids that they get to maybe come up and blow the horn or just be on a boat for the very first time.
So you're telling me I get to blow the horn?
Anything you want.
Seriously?
So whether you're a mover, a shaker, or just a Michigan fudgy like me, these dependable ferry boats make it all possible. Besides, how are you going to swim to shore with all those bags of fudge?
I knew he was going to blow the horn. The ferry ride, that's half the fun of getting to Mackinac Island. And that is going to do it for MiVote Mackinac. Make sure you join us tomorrow night as we continue to cover this year's Mackinac Policy Conference. For all of us at Detroit Public TV, I'm Christy McDonald. Thanks again for joining us. Have a great night. We'll see you tomorrow.